Hi, Mac.
Hi, Bob.
How are you?
Fabulous. How are you?
I'm not quite that good, but I'm doing fine. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV. You're Mac McClelland, and you've been on Blogging Heads TV before. You're a journalist, and you've written a book about Burma, right?
I did.
You did. What's the name of that book?
It's called For Us, Surrender is Out of the Question.
Okay. And you are a journalist more generally, and you've just gotten a lot of attention for a piece in Mother Jones called I Was a Warehouse Wage Slave? Is that the name of it?
That's what they called it for the online version. So if you're looking for online, that's the title, yeah.
Okay. And it got more than 4,000 Facebook likes and 1,500 tweets, which means it's more important than anything I have ever done, I think.
If that's the metric.
That is the metric.
Okay.
Those are two metrics. What it's about is, when I order something online, like from Amazon or something, I haven't given much thought to what happens in between the time I click and it magically appears on my doorstep, whatever I purchased.
Sure.
But when you think about it, something has to happen, there must be a warehouse out there somewhere with stuff in it. Mm-hmm. And that's the world you entered, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
And how'd you get? How did this mission start?
It started because I actually reported on one of these other warehouses, because they're all over the place, and they're owned and operated by all kinds of different companies. So I was in a different one in Ohio when I was reporting a different feature last summer. Mm-hmm. And when the story was not about that, but we ended up including the information about it because it was just such an awful scene in there. And so my editors were like, how widespread is this? And I said, extremely. This is actually how almost all stuff that comes off the internet, especially from big companies, is processed through these kinds of warehouses, and nobody's paying attention to what it's like inside them, so they can kind of run them, however they want, and the way they want is obviously the most efficient way, and that just comes at the cost of treating the people who work in there like crap. So we decided to do a whole feature just on that topic.
Okay, now the warehouse you entered was kind of where and who does it ship stuff for?
I'm not allowed to say.
Oh, you're not? That explains it. That explains why I didn't discover that in the course of reading the piece. And why is that? Is that was it by arrangement with them that you were doing this or did they didn't know you were a journalist?
No. I just went in and applied for a job like anybody else. Mm-hmm. But our lawyers were, obviously reviewing the case history before this happened and while this was happening. And historically, apparently, when a journalist goes to work for a company but doesn't say, I'm a journalist, even if nobody asked me that, But even if they just, nobody asked, so there's no lying, but if the company sues, generally the courts will side with the company. Mm-hmm. And so our lawyers were like, if you want to stay out of this, you should probably not name that, which we didn't, we were kind of bummed about it at first, but then as it turns out, it doesn't really matter, because if we name this one company, it makes it look like only this company is terrible, when in fact, pretty much all
companies are terrible, yes.
That's right.
But pretty much anytime you order something online, probably things are happening much like what you describe in the article somewhere.
For the most part, yeah.
Okay. So tell us about kind of what was so horrible about it.
Well, it's more like the attitude around it than it's both. It's the attitude and it's the actual work. And I did some radio interviews last week where people, like a person would call in and be like, "Learn the value of manual labor, princess." And I used to work in a warehouse. I worked for a moving company, moving furniture for 5 years. And so I actually really like manual labor. And you could see how this could be a really appealing job, if it had reasonable goals and numbers. But instead, you have to, fulfill like 1,000 orders. I had to pick 1,350 items per day or something. So you have got to be moving at like suicide pace all the time in order to be able to make those numbers. So they're very minimal, very, very minimal breaks. And you just have to run and run and run and just, all these things also happen at angles that are not really ergonomically friendly. So, you will pick hundreds of things off the floor or like super high up. So everything hurts and everybody hurts. Everybody who works there hurts like all the time. And it's just not really sustainable, but it's the cheapest way to do it. So there's that. And then, also they treat people like cattle, we're like herded into the lunchrooms and you only have exactly 29 minutes and 59 seconds for a break and you have to try to pee, you have to go through metal detectors and it's just, you can be, they fire people just constantly and rehire new people. Everybody is totally disposable and they definitely make you feel exactly how disposable you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were very precise firing metrics too, right? Like during the first week, if you're late at all, you're fired, and then subsequently, wasn't it? And I guess you could say maybe there's a virtue in clarity or something. It was very clear what kind of aggregate levels of tardiness would result in your firing and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, there was a point system, like you would have for high schoolers or something. If you're a minute late, it's worth X number of points. If you're more than an hour late, it's worth X number of points. 6 points total equals release. Mm-hmm. So they do have very clear numbers. And you can also get a point if you take more than 29 minutes and 59 seconds for lunch. If you take 30 minutes and 1 second, you can get points for that.
But you've got a big warehouse space to cover. Right.
Yes.
I mean, like how big, how far did you range in the course of the day?
The warehouse is hundreds of thousands of square feet. I can't say exactly how many for identifying purposes, but these warehouses in general can run 600, 700, 800,000 square feet. I mean, they are massive, and they estimated that we were running between 10 to 13 miles a day in order to, get the items. And I was talking to one of the other workers who travels around, to do these jobs because largely they're part-time,
mm-hmm.
They're the short-term,
You were technically working for a temp agency kind of, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I gather this warehouse had on the one hand some people who worked for the warehouse itself, but then for seasonal adjustment reasons or whatever, there was a substantial contingent that was working for a temp agency.
That's right. But they have people working via temp agency year round. That's not just, definitely they hire more during seasonal, but temps are cheaper. They're cheaper than real employees.
And you were making how much?
I made $11.50, I think, $11.50 an hour.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You're running around. It sounds like it's actually a few hundred yards by a few hundred yards, unless I've got a decimal point problem, which seems like a whole long. In other words, from one end of it to the other is like quite a bit longer than a football field, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so and so you've got to meet a certain quota. If you had, is there some level that you had to sustain in order to just not get fired in terms of number of items you had to place that you had to ship every day? Was that explicit?
The number is explicit. The practice is generally that if you can't make your goals, you get counseled, and counseled is, somebody telling you that you're doing a bad job and how can you do a better job and why won't you start doing a better job? So, I only worked there for a couple of days and people came up to me several times a day to tell me I was doing a bad job because I was not meeting my goals. And I was brand new. So if I would have had more practice, I would have been better and I would have been faster. But you will get, for as long as you don't make your numbers, you will continue to get counseled until, it is possible that if your numbers are low enough, they'll just fire you.
Mm-hmm. You were there for 4 days, actually, right? You worked for 4 days?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked for like 36 hours because they're long days. So I worked about a week's worth of hours in 4 days because they're 10.5-hour shifts.
Mm-hmm. And so you were, very like tired and sore, Advil eligible, I guess. And what do people? I mean, you might think that's a passing thing. I mean, what do people say who have been there for months? I mean, are they do they get over the soreness or?
No. The people who worked there for a long time were the ones who were telling me, you need to be taking more painkillers. Like, you should be taking Advil just as a matter of course in your morning, before you start working, and then in the middle if you need it again, and then when you go home. So, one of the guys who worked there he was an actual employee, not a temp, and so he worked there for a long time. And I said, and he was making his numbers. And I said, doesn't it hurt? Like, doesn't your body hurt? And he was like, oh yeah, of course it does. And he'd been working there for more than a year, I think. It's just the sort of thing that you don't really have any choice. And so you just keep doing it because you need the job and you need the work. And a lot of people in there are in their 50s or 60s, I'm only 31, and it's so hard on your system that, a lot of times people stop working there or get fired or just quit because they literally can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Could you have kept doing it if you needed to do it to sustain yourself?
Sure, I could have done it you mean until I broke something or like my body stopped working? I got an email the day that the story came out. I got an email from a girl who used to work for Amazon. She worked in an Amazon warehouse, and she, wrote me this long email like, oh, I read your story. I worked in a place that was just like that, and she worked there for a couple years, and she doesn't work there anymore. She, was going to night school or whatever. She got a different job. She said her shoulder, she had the same job as me. She said her shoulder still makes a grinding noise, when she moves it, even though she quit 2 years ago. She's 22 years old. So you can do...
Too young for grinding noises.
Yeah, for permanent damage, and that's what people, the townspeople were warning me when I was like, oh, I have to start this job tomorrow, and they were like, try not to do any permanent damage because you're pretty young and it'll never go away, and that's what happens to people who work there. And I was like, great, thanks. And it's just accepted as, a matter of course.
And what was the deal with the static electricity in the book section?
There's a lot of static electricity in the book section. It's cold. It was wintertime, so it's cold. It's on metal shelves. It's paper. It's dry. There's electricity running through that whole place because there are conveyor belts everywhere, right? So because you need to be able to put your items and send them off to wherever they go. And fans, they also, there's all this electricity whirring. And so basically, anytime you touch something that's metal while you're running around on this concrete floor, it shocks you. So that's...
It sounded more serious than the shocks I used to get from the light switch, like when I was a kid.
Sure. Or like when you're getting out of your car sometimes or something. It is this way. I mean, it's when that happens, it's sort of like, and it sucks, but it's sort of, it will draw you back. Like it is a good, solid, industrial strength shock. And to do it, 500 times, before lunch is just it's demoralizing.
And how long do people keep doing this? How long were there people there who had been doing it for years?
Yeah, there are people working there who've been doing it for years. One of the radio interviews I was doing last week, this guy called in. He was in his late 40s or early 50s. I can't remember which. He and his wife both worked at a warehouse. I think that was an Amazon warehouse as well. And they were saying, he was saying, my wife is, she's way older than you, and she makes her numbers. She manages to make her goals every day, whatever they were, 1,400 items or something like that. And the host of the show asked him, how long do you think that's sustainable for? You've been doing it for a couple years. And he was like, probably a couple years total before your body just shuts down. So, and the people who work there know that there's a limited amount of time that they will be able to do it before they become less functional.
So like, I imagine everyone walking at like a brisk pace, like all the time. Is that it? Or some running or some, but nobody's kind of like just, dogging.
No. Well, I mean, you could do that, but you would get yelled at a lot and, potentially.
You mean people would see you walking slowly and say speed up, or they would just, when you got your feedback about your metrics, you would.
Yeah, probably another employee would never be like, hey man, you better hurry up because
it's just your performance review when you about how fast you're, how many items you're delivering.
Yes, it would definitely be reflected in there.
Okay. So let me now, play devil's advocate. Let me assume the role of somebody from the Cato Institute here. So like these people, they would rather have these jobs than not have jobs, obviously, right?
Sure.
So it's better than that. And I guess the pure Cato argument is that the more comfortable you make the working arrangements, the more it costs, the producer. So, well, first of all, they'd say, well, consumers have to pay more for the stuff, and these consumers are themselves, after all, workers trying to make ends meet. If you make it too costly, the stuff, the jobs will just go overseas, and where they have certainly no more regulation, usually workplace regulation than they have here, right? So you've probably heard some of these kinds of arguments.
Yes. Or the people start unionizing and organizing and demand, more wages. Somebody will just invent a robot that can do all of it or something. Yes. Right. And then no one will have any jobs ever again. Yes, I have.
Exactly what I was going to point out in my role as the Cato spokesperson. But I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, there is. I assume you're hoping that something will change here. That actually working conditions will become less demanding, right?
That would be. That would be ideal. You're right. Consumers have to pay for this stuff. Consumers are people who, like these people, have crappy jobs and don't make enough money. So. Yeah, okay, the entire economy is a disaster. We'll give you that. But these companies are wildly profitable. I guess you can't really expect them to take any sort of hit off their bottom line, right? And treat people like humans. That's like way too much. It would actually be very difficult to ship these jobs overseas because these are shipping,
Actually, that's a good point. These jobs ain't going anywhere.
Right, ship this crap to people in the United States.
These are the nodes that have to be fairly near the Americans being shipped to. So that actually is a not so bad argument. I mean those kinds of industries are less vulnerable to the standard counter argument. So I guess maybe that's why they bring up the robots. If they can't threaten you with foreign replacement,
right?
They tell you that a robot will do it.
That can do all of this stuff. And then I guess people, there'd be jobs in, for robot engineers and robot maintainers, but you're right, there wouldn't be as many entry-level jobs for people. The world needs entry-level jobs. That's not, my argument is not that jobs like this shouldn't exist. They totally should. There are people who need to do jobs like this, and that's fine, but they don't have to be this awful, and this is sort of like there was an e-commerce specialist that I interviewed for the article, and she chose, a shipping company to ship the products out for her company, which sells things online. And she was saying, I never even thought about what it was like at the place where I hired. You just pick the cheapest one. Mm-hmm. And so everybody wants to be the cheapest one. And so everybody's doing this. But if people were more aware of how mean and ugly it was, she was saying, my company, which sells to, it's a luxury product line. So they sell to sort of richer people. My company would pay for, some sort of humane certification. There is a segment of the population that pays for like organic food. You pay more money for things that you think are important. Not everybody's going to do that. Not everybody can do that. Mm-hmm. But if there was a standard, that could be a start for at least some. I mean, I would order from that. You and me are,
Mm-hmm.
we would probably do that. We could do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would pay a little premium to know that the people providing the service were being treated better than they would otherwise. What is going on in that realm? I mean, are there any projects afoot to bring consumers in touch with the working conditions that they're supporting?
It's sort of just starting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was that Morning Call series of articles about the Amazon warehouse in Pennsylvania. There was Gizmodo picked up a blog written by some people who worked there. The Huffington Post did a couple stories about it, and this, about that one was about Walmart and Amazon warehouses. So the information is, you have to have the information first about what it's like and how widespread this problem is. And that part of this process is just starting. So next would be someone recognizing that this is a niche and that someone creating a standard or creating a shipping company that, promises some sort of humane standard of conditions for their workers and sells that to the people who are buying that kind of agenda.
Mm-hmm.
You should totally do that. That could be like your next.
So there could be like a little seal, like that shows up alongside certain products, even in principle on Amazon, right? I mean, like some would have it and some wouldn't, I guess. Amazon offers you an array often of products. I mean, the same product, and you can pay this much for it or this much for it, depending on which shipper you want to buy it from. So you can imagine shippers being able to advertise like these little seals that some NGO hands out for humane treatment, right?
Sure. Well, Amazon handles their own fulfillment. So
they don't outsource?
No.
They own all their warehouses.
Because they figured out that, they can do it best. And so they operate, they have like 30 or 50 fulfillment centers.
And do we know what life is like within an Amazon warehouse?
I can't really comment on that personally.
Ooh, that leads me to a suspicion about
what has come out of in other news reports.
Uh-huh.
Yes, we do know what it's like inside an Amazon warehouse. People do know. If you're looking for the information, you can't find it.
Well, it's bad.
It's bad.
It's comparable to what you experienced.
Yes.
Uh-huh. So, but that is, I'm kind of surprised because, Amazon does offer a lot of stuff from all of these independent retailers, right? Some, including a lot of mom and pop retailers.
That's true.
Do all those things go through Amazon warehouses? Probably.
So, now we're getting into like the nitty gritty of logistics. It can. So if you have a business and you want Amazon to be able to sell your products, you have a contract you can have an arrangement with them where they just sell your stuff, but then you ship it yourself. Or you can have an arrangement where they sell your stuff and they hold your product. They have your inventory and they ship it out for you. So it depends. Amazon does a lot of fulfillment for other companies. So in an Amazon warehouse, there's stuff you buy on Amazon and then the stuff you buy from smaller companies. So that is a thing that they do. So you can buy their services for things like that.
Okay. So anyway, there is the first stirrings of a movement afoot to at least allow consumers to eventually have choice about the working conditions they're supporting and have the option of paying more to support better ones.
I think that would be, sort of the best case scenario. When you're talking about, that money has to come from somewhere. When you buy things on the internet, from Walmart or from Amazon, and they're super discounted, and then they ship to you for free, but then those companies still have billion-dollar profits. The money has to come from somewhere, and a lot of it is coming from the labor that goes into, that's where they're cutting a lot of the costs. So would I buy say I don't want to go to the store and I just want to buy my stuff on the internet. It's totally valid. Would I buy from a different internet site that sold the same stuff, but, you know, I knew had better shipping practices? Sure, I would. I would now, only that I know what it's like in places like that. So hopefully, you know, the more that people are aware, you know, consumers will ask. Consumers will demand, hopefully, you know, these kinds of conditions. That's got to be the first step.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One thing I was wondering is, you know, you have an interest in human rights broadly, and you've done a certain amount of work on the international scene covering human rights issues. You wrote this book about Burma. In that context, don't these issues and grievances seem kind of like small potatoes? I mean, given some of the things you've probably seen or reported about that go on in other countries, you know, human rights abuses in a wholly different sense of the word. You know what I mean? I
mean, like, are all American people's problems not that serious because we don't have, like, a terrible civil war with, like, you know, armed guerrillas running around and shooting people?
Yeah, I guess maybe the question is, isn't working in an Amazon warehouse better than being killed by a guerrilla fighter? Would you agree? And then Amazon could use that in their advertising. That would be like a blurb from you.
Right. You know, it's about when you go to refugee camps, for example, you know, and you talk to people, it's the right to sort of live what those people want, other than, you know, people around them to just stop killing each other. What they talk about a lot is that they just want the right to be able to raise their family and survive, basically. Mm-hmm. This is the right. This is the fundamental right. So to survive, you have to have the people who are shooting stop shooting, but you also have to be able to provide and to live and to work and whatever. Mm-hmm. This is not an insignificant problem. I don't think, you know, that there are Americans who are working in this country and being treated in a way that destroys them physically, in addition to, at the same time, paying them almost no money so that they can barely survive on it. That is a pretty serious, even on a, you know, global scale of all the horrible things that are happening, that's a pretty serious violation in rights. And there's no excuse. It's not like, you know, this is Congo and we have all these ethnic groups that have been fighting for a really long time and, like, how are we going to make them stop? This is, you know, partly a matter of behavior of companies that have a lot of money and a lot of options and do control this and could fix it if they wanted to.
Okay. I guess the last thing, by the way, that a Cato person would say is, okay, even if the consumers are kind of willing to pay it, I think they'd say that the result is going to be that fewer products get bought, and so there are marginally fewer American workers that can be employed by these factories, right? That's probably the final economist argument. But you might say that's still better. I mean, you know, I don't know. What would you say if that were true?
I feel like, you know, 100 people who are paid enough, if this is about, like, marginal employment differences, 100 people who are paid enough to survive and feed themselves and feed their families and be, you know, functional, is maybe that's better than 110 people who are destroying their bodies and are, you know, still having to use a lot of social services because they make so little money that they can't support themselves. Maybe, I mean, I'm not an economist, but, you know, maybe that's better.
Okay. I will accept your word for that. There's a question I wanted to answer. I wanted to ask you just because it was raised by reading your piece, and it's not really a very important question, but I've never had an opportunity to ask anyone this before, and that is, why so many dildos? You referred several times to a seemingly inordinate number of dildos.
Yeah.
Shipped.
Yeah. It was a lot. It was like a lot of dildos, really.
I mean,
and I have a pretty high bar for, like, what I consider a lot of dildos, frankly. And even for me, I was like, this is a lot of dildos. Why? Because you can buy them on the internet, and people apparently don't want to go to porn stores like they did back in the day. I don't know. Honestly, I was shocked. I was really shocked because I don't imagine, like when I think about buying dildos, I don't think about people going online to do that. But maybe that's just because I live in San Francisco and we have like dildos in liquor stores practically here. But there is, yeah, I guess there's a really, really big market for that. It is also possible that the place that I was in, had a contract. Because like I said, a lot of these places have a lot of contracts. So it's possible that, because a lot of these dildos came from the same company, that
sounds like a giveaway to me, that maybe it was a contracting issue. Although I guess you would see a disproportionate number of things in general that people are embarrassed to buy in person at these kinds of warehouses.
I guess, but we would talk about that at lunch, because when you buy it on the internet, in fact, like if you go to a porn store, just like the creepy guy who works at the porn store sees that you're buying the dildo. If you buy it on the internet, between like it coming off the truck, coming out of the box, being put into the bins, being picked up out of the bins by a different person, sent on a conveyor, packed by someone else, taped closed by someone else, it goes through like 15 hands.
Yeah, but none of them are thinking about you as the consumer, right?
I mean, the people who put the packing slip in there with your name and your address on it, which is not a thing that the guy who works at the porn store necessarily has, they might be thinking about you and, your dildo purchasing.
They might. Although it sounds like they wouldn't have much time to think about that, judging by your description of working conditions.
That's true. They would have 1 second to consider what kind of pervert you might be.
So I think I wouldn't worry about that so much. So what project are you moving on to next? Something comparable? Or are you going back to the international scene?
I think I'm going to be domestic for a bit. I think we've got some domestic stuff in the works. I don't think I can talk about it yet. But
so it sounds like another top secret investigative thing.
It's not as shady as this. So less shady than this, but hopefully as interesting.
Okay. Well, good. Well, we'll link to the piece, and maybe add to the billions of people who've already read it. Has it surprised you, the reception? I mean, the amount of feedback you've gotten, has it surprised you?
No, because this is a thing. I mean, when I write stuff about Africa and not that many people say stuff, or when people do say stuff, I'm like, yeah, okay, nobody actually really cares about what's happening in Africa. But this affects people. Everybody orders crap off the internet.
Right.
So it's a thing that is really, it impacts you, and you impact it. You as the consumer, as the person who's doing this stuff, like, people really have a relationship with the information, like a true connection to the information. So I'm not surprised. And I'm really glad that people are interested to know where their stuff comes from.
Okay. Well, thank you. Congratulations on your successful mission, and good luck on your next one.
Thank you.
And then you can come back and tell us about it.
Okay, I can't wait.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Okay. Bye-bye.